We've all been there. You see their name pop up on your phone or you see them walking down the hallway, and your stomach immediately drops. You're already rehearsing the argument you're about to have. But here's the problem. When you prepare for a fight, you've already lost your peace. I want to give you 3 ways to handle a difficult personality without losing your cool or your dignity. First, I want you to use the mirror question. When they come at you with a projection or an unfair criticism, don't defend yourself. Defense is an invitation to keep attacking. Instead, ask them, "It sounds like you're frustrated. What is the specific result you're looking for right now?" This forces them to move from their emotions back to the facts. It puts the work back on them. Second, learn the gray rock technique. Difficult people thrive on your reaction. They want the fire. Don't give it to them. Become as uninteresting as a gray rock. Give short, neutral answers like "I see," "perhaps," or "that's an interesting perspective." When you stop providing the fuel, they'll eventually stop looking for the spark. Third, set a time box boundary. You don't have to stay in a draining conversation until it's over. You stay until you decide it's over. Use a phrase like, "I have exactly 5 minutes before my next task, so let's focus on the most important point." This tells them that your time is a limited resource and you aren't available for their chaos. In the arena of human interaction, we often operate under the exhausting illusion that if we just say the right words, use the right logic, or show enough kindness, we can dictate how another person responds to us. We tie our internal peace to an external result that we simply do not own. This is the trap of being attached to the outcome. When you walk into a room to have a difficult conversation, and your goal is to make the other person understand you, apologize to you, or change their mind, you have effectively handed them the keys to your emotional well-being. If they don't give you that apology or that understanding, you leave the interaction feeling defeated, drained, and frustrated. You are essentially telling the world that your happiness is contingent upon someone else's cooperation. Detaching from the outcome is the radical act of reclaiming that power. It is the realization that while you are 100% responsible for the input, your tone, your words, and your integrity, you are 0% responsible for the output. Think about a trial lawyer or a high-level negotiator. They don't go into a room hoping the other side will be nice. They don't expect the person across from them to suddenly become reasonable. If they did, they would be emotionally compromised the moment the other party became aggressive. Instead, they focus entirely on their own process. When you detach from the outcome, you aren't becoming indifferent or cold, you are becoming bulletproof. You are deciding that your character is not up for negotiation based on how someone else behaves. If you are dealing with a difficult personality and they choose to be loud, irrational, or dismissive, that is a reflection of their internal state, not your value. When you remain attached to the outcome, you treat their behavior as a grade on your performance. You think, "If I were better at this, they wouldn't be acting this way." But that is a lie. Difficult people are difficult because of their own history, their own ego, and their own limitations. By detaching, you stop trying to fix their broken weather and instead focus on holding your own umbrella. This shift in perspective changes the way you speak. When you aren't desperate for a specific result, your voice loses that high-pitched edge of anxiety. You stop over-explaining. You stop selling your point of view. There is a profound authority in a person who speaks their truth and then sits back, perfectly comfortable with the possibility that the other person might not like it. This comfort comes from knowing that your job was to be honest and respectful, and you've already succeeded at the moment the words left your mouth. The win happened in your delivery, not in their reception. Most of the stress we experience in our relationships comes from this invisible tug of war where we are trying to pull someone toward a version of themselves that doesn't exist yet. When you drop the rope, the tension vanishes. You realize that you can't lose a game you've stopped playing. You can stay in the room, you can continue the conversation, and you can be present, but the hooks they throw no longer have anything to snag onto. You become a non-stick surface. Imagine the freedom of entering a conflict knowing that no matter what the other person says, your evening isn't ruined. You are no longer waiting for their validation to feel like the conversation was a success. You define success by your own composure. Did you stay calm? Did you speak clearly? Did you maintain your boundaries? If the answer is yes, then you have won, regardless of whether the other person walked away angry or stayed to argue. This is the essence of true confidence. It isn't the belief that everyone will agree with you. It's the certainty that you will be okay even if they don't. You start to see difficult people not as obstacles to your peace, but as weight training for your character. They are providing you with the resistance necessary to build the muscle of self-regulation. The more you practice this detachment, the more you realize that most people's difficult behavior is actually a cry for a reaction. They want to pull you into the mud because they are lonely there. When you refuse to get in the mud, not out of arrogance, but out of a deep commitment to your own mental clarity, you change the entire dynamic of the room. You become the thermostat that sets the temperature, rather than the thermometer that merely reacts to it. You are no longer a victim of the environment. You are the architect of your own internal atmosphere. This doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care enough about the truth to let it stand on its own, without the need for someone else's signature of approval. When you step into an interaction with a difficult personality, your natural human instinct is to engage as a participant. Your nervous system treats their aggression, their sarcasm, or their passive aggressiveness as a direct threat, triggering a physical response that prepares you to either fight back or flee the scene. This participant mode is exactly where the drama lies. In this state, you are emotionally entangled. You are reacting to their tone, feeling the sting of their words, and searching for a way to defend your ego. But there is a much more powerful position you can occupy, and that is the position of the researcher. Adopting the observer mindset means you mentally take 2 steps back and put on an imaginary lab coat. Instead of experiencing the person's behavior, you begin to study it. You move from the role of a target to the role of a scientist observing a specimen in a controlled environment. This shift is not about being cold or robotic. It is about creating a psychological buffer that prevents their chaos from leaking into your consciousness. When you observe, you are looking for patterns, not pain. You start to see their outbursts not as personal attacks, but as predictable data points. Imagine you are watching a storm from behind a thick pane of reinforced glass. You can see the lightning, you can hear the thunder, and you can observe the wind whipping the trees, but you aren't getting wet. The observer mindset is that glass. When a difficult person begins their routine, perhaps they start gaslighting or they use guilt as a weapon, the researcher in you takes a mental note. You think to yourself, that's an interesting tactic. They are using volume to try and compensate for a lack of evidence. Or notice how they change the subject the moment I ask for a specific date. By labeling their behavior in real time, you engage the analytical part of your brain, which effectively dials down the emotional part. You cannot be intensely curious and intensely angry at the same time. Curiosity is the antidote to triggers. When you are curious about why they chose that specific word or why they always lean in when they're lying, you are no longer a victim of the interaction. You are the one with the clipboard, and they are the ones providing the performance. This objective watchfulness allows you to see the mechanics of the manipulation. Most difficult people have a limited playbook. They have 3 or 4 moves that have worked for them in the past to get their way. As a participant, these moves frustrate you. As an observer, these moves become fascinatingly repetitive. You start to see the tell before the move even happens. You see the slight shift in their posture or the specific sigh they use before they launch into a guilt trip. Because you are watching objectively, you aren't caught off guard. You are prepared. This level of detachment gives you a massive tactical advantage, because while they are spiraling into their emotional drama, you are maintaining total clarity. You are seeing the chessboard while they are just throwing the pieces. You begin to realize that their behavior is actually quite small and desperate. It is a series of defense mechanisms designed to protect a very fragile ego. When you see the why behind the what, the sting disappears. You don't get mad at a toddler for throwing a tantrum because you understand their developmental limitations. The observer mindset allows you to view difficult adults through a similar lens of clinical understanding. Furthermore, this mindset changes your body language in a way that often de-escalates the other person without you saying a word. When you are an observer, you tend to be still. You aren't fidgeting, you aren't interrupting. and your eyes aren't darting around in search of an escape. You are simply watching. This calm, steady gaze can be incredibly disarming to a high-conflict personality because they are looking for a specific hit of adrenaline from your reaction. They want to see you flinch, cry, or scream. When they look at you and see a calm researcher taking mental notes, there is nowhere for their energy to go. It's like throwing a ball against a velvet curtain instead of a brick wall. There is no bounce back. You aren't giving them the feedback loop they need to sustain their behavior. By remaining objective, you force them to deal with the silence and the lack of reaction, which often leads them to exhaust themselves much faster. You are essentially outlasting their ego by refusing to feed it. This isn't just a communication strategy, it is a form of mental sovereignty. You are deciding that your internal state is a high security zone and you are the only one with the clearance to enter. By observing the tactics of others, you ensure that you never become a casualty of their internal wars. You stay grounded in the reality of the moment, watching the theater of their personality play out, while you remain safely seated in the front row, untouched and unbothered. In the high-stakes environment of a courtroom or a heated personal confrontation, the most valuable asset you possess is not your intelligence or your quick wit, it is your neutrality. We often mistake anger for power, believing that a raised voice or a sharp tongue signals strength and dominance. However, in the world of effective communication, anger is actually a leak. It is a sign that your defenses have been breached, and that the other person has successfully found a way to bypass your logic and strike at your core. The moment you lose your temper, you have effectively handed the other person the remote control to your nervous system. You are no longer driving the car, they are. By pushing a specific button, whether it's an insult, a lie, or a dismissive comment, they can make you jump, shout, or lose your focus. They become the master of the interaction because they are the ones dictating how you feel. The goal of neutrality is to take that remote control back and put it firmly in your own pocket, ensuring that no matter how much noise the other person makes, they cannot change the frequency of your internal state. Neutrality is not about being a doormat, and it certainly isn't about being passive. True neutrality is an active, aggressive form of self-control. It is the ability to stand in the middle of a burning building and feel the heat without becoming